The following is a poem by Naia Waheed from her incredible collection of poetry titled Salt. If we wanted to, people of color could burn the world down for what we have experienced, are experiencing, but we don't. How stunningly beautiful that our sacred respect for the earth, for life, is deeper than our rage. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 5 of the Prana and Poetry Pod. This is Part 1 of Business and Decoloniality. This episode discusses sensitive topics related to cultural appropriation and racism in the wellness space. If this might upset you, or you're triggered by the word white, it's best to skip. So you have a good day now. Bye-bye. To the spiritually and ethically conscious individual who is anti-racist, the motivation behind this episode stems from dealing with white supremacist trolls. And I kept my promise. If you remember, I said I'm not going to engage with these faceless foes, so I'm responding here instead. Like I said before, I'm effing sick and tired of defending Dharma through the lens of indigeneity and decoloniality. After all the labor I put in, I get this one troll that makes me think, what a waste of my words and energy. There are some dumbass people out there. And it's tricky navigating online spaces, which aren't actually safer than being out there, in the land of white supremacy. And I didn't want to make the podcast about white supremacy, but let's just let the cat out of the bag and name the monster in the room of decoloniality. This monster is the reason why things don't change, why there's no equity in the world of work and even entrepreneurship, and I'll explain more shortly. But before I continue, I'm going to list the topics I'm addressing in this massive episode, which I'll have to break down in parts. So here we go. The first topic, white supremacy in the Western wellness space. 2, McMindfulness, somatics and embodiment, the stripping down of indigenous spirituality into capitalist commodities. 3, as in algorithm, as in reality, the continued oppression of black and brown bodies in online spaces. 4, and finally, Dharmic Entrepreneurship, moving towards an ethical business model. We'll see what topics I can fit into this episode, but along the way, my main goal is to propose a better way of doing business, which is aligned with Dharma. I mean, doesn't that make sense when you're using Dharmic practices for your business? And before I get to the part about the troll, who also accused those of calling out cultural appropriation and harm in yoga as being victims, I just want to name that within the context of white supremacy and those who experience the harm from white supremacy behaviors, that there's a big difference in being a victim and a warrior. A warrior is acting to reclaim and restore. A victim is so unconscious they cannot move beyond their conditioned thoughts. So the question arises, who is the real victim? The one educating and encouraging change that benefits all groups, benefits humanity, or the one acting like a roadblock to growth and healing, the one desperately trying to stop the work of decolonization and uncolonizing of the body, the psyche? Oh, the white Western wellness space is just so problematic. White supremacy in wellness is a thing. If you don't agree, this podcast is not for you. So bye-bye now. See ya and peace out. So I'll begin with a comment that was left on one of my social media pages, which I deleted because the ignorance in the words activated my sacred rage. Judging by the profile picture and some of their posts, well, most of their posts, this person is invested in an Abrahamic religion, so they're coming from all their conditionings from this life view and with a specific belief system that bears an extreme mentality, bears strong binaries. If you're Hindu, for example, this person believes you're evil and going to hell. Yeah, I'm laughing inside. I'll just read you the first full comment they left on my post in a second, which was in response to the Yoga and Decoloniality podcast episode that I posted about. But let me bring your attention to the second message, which was in response to me saying, please do not comment on my pages again. This person's response was, I say what I want, where I want, when I want. Like, whoa. So this person seems to think they're utterly entitled and has no boundaries. It gives me full-on narc vibes. So this is how they began their tirade in response to my Yoga and Decoloniality episode. This is what they say. Yoga was proclaimed public domain by the nation of India. Nothing has been stolen. At worst, people are culturally insensitive about yoga. But you do not get to claim appropriation. Please get it right. Also, many yoga practitioners reject regressive Hindu religious ideas. What are you going to do? No one owns yoga. Whew, end quote. Can you just imagine the rage I felt at this? Fellow Hindus, I know you're infuriated right now. So let's just deconstruct this message. The first line is complete ignorance and invalidation of a native person's experience and voice. The second line shows a lack of empathy, and the third line is an aggressive attack on Sanatan Dharma, combined with threatening language. What are you gonna do? All in all, my friends, we have a white supremacist troll. The second message this person sent was diabolical, so I'm not going to share it. So what the demon of white supremacy, the narcissist, does is shadow project. Let's take, quote, regressive Hindu religious ideas. So, number one, I'm going to call this person a Karen. She has no problem taking from Hindu religious ideas, like yoga, but happy to strip yoga of its entire methodology and framework by calling Hinduism, or Sanatan Dharma, as regressive. If it was that regressive and backwards, your ancestors would not have pillaged and plundered Bharat of its wealth, of its $45 trillion. Calling Hinduism regressive and backwards was exactly how the conniving missionaries enacted their conversion tactics. It was part of their strategy to make Hindus believe that they were going to hell, that they were uncivilized. Why did the people of Bharat believe them? Because we lost the science and the highly developed reasoning behind our practices and rituals. We lost our connection to nature and way of life because of the conscious efforts of the invaders to destroy us over a 1,000-year period. Now here is a thriving, ancient, deeply intelligent culture, Sanatan Dharma, and here are the invaders, those from proselytizing origins, using barbaric and sadistic methods to convert or slaughter Hindus, destroy their indigenous land, and steal their treasures. By the way, this troll had a picture of white Jesus on their profile photo. Just saying. So tell me again, which is the regressive civilization? Which regressive civilizations and cultures sought to wipe out sophisticated indigenous cultures and their technologies and medicines, and not before stealing their knowledge and dumbing it down to make it palatable to those with small to no brain cells? Hey colonizer, is that you? To this troll, the regressive religions you're talking about have deep science behind all that they do. Why else do you steal everything from us, then exclude and discriminate against us when you sell it to people who look like you? I'm going to stop here because, believe me, I can debate this person, but I'm not going to waste my precious energy on low-vibe losers who spend their time sitting in their PJs all hunched back and miserable over their laptops or addicted to their phones, fighting those who seek fruitful change and equity in society. Stay out of my space. My content is not for you, Karen. And let's clarify something else here. The disease showing up in this person's comment is of whiteness, not the color of skin, but the ideology ingrained in the mind. The ideology of whiteness, which holds itself at the center of power. at the center of experience. So any opinion or narrative outside of this center of experience, like that of a brown girl talking about the harm she experiences in the Western wellness industry and of the cultural appropriation and erasure and exclusion she experiences, immediately registers to this frozen mind and body as a threat. Little brown girl over here is a massive threat. To what? What is my voice, my little itty-bitty voice, triggering in them? What illusion is it potentially shattering? And here's the answer. It's a threat to the ego, the white ego. And let's also name that it's not just the ideology of whiteness, but more specifically the ideology of the narcissist, the inner predator, which manifests in other ideologies that claim superiority over others who are different. It manifests in those who fear diversity and difference. And this, friends, is the monster we are up against, this fragile little ego. So I'll choose to laugh now and shake off the absolute dumbassness in this comment and shake out the sand in my shoe. The real fear of supremacist cultures, those seeking to erase indigenous cultures, is the fear of losing the center of one's power. Power that has been stolen through generations, the unearned power and privilege. What is missing within the ideology of whiteness, in the ideology of those who hold themselves as superior to any person or being, is humanity. And then you want to teach the yamas and niyamas. Really? Without unlearning the harm within your own bodies and minds, you want to teach and heal other people's chakras? Really? Chakra healing, Karen? Get the fuck out of here. You're in dire need of my Dharma and Decolonial Toolkit. Link in description, be sure to download it. How far can one go within yoga or any indigenous practices? How far can one go as a facilitator or healer if one cannot face the harm of whiteness within their own bodies and minds? Look up Tada Hazumi and his works on cultural somatics. Look up what he says about the freeze that the white body experiences, which is why, as people of color, as bodies of culture, we can't have fruitful conversations together. Because in this freeze that the white body experiences when they are called out, there is enormous guilt and shame, which a majority are not willing to work through and transform. So as white yoga teachers who are in denial over black and brown people's experiences, who feel resistant and the need to push back when we speak out, they must ask themselves, what is my relationship with my ego? That must be confronted when you are positioning yourself as an authority in non-white cultural practices. Do you know that the end of yoga is the dissolution of the ego? And if you don't know that, what are you actually practicing? A commodified, watered-down indigenous practice that sells in a marketplace? Or are you a yoga sadhaka? Is this just a product to you? Or are you a yoga sadhaka? Is this a way of life? Which path is calling to you? Oh, Lordy Lord. Or shall I say, Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om. Yes, I'm being sarcastic. So who am I speaking to? Who is this decolonial education for? Intelligent, spiritually and ethically conscious individuals from all backgrounds, obviously anti-racist, those on the yogic path or dharmic path who are seeking authentic indigenous knowledge from someone who is rooted in her culture and its original framework and teachings. Here, we are not into dopamine hits through one-off practices that are watered down and appropriated by predatory, biased, and unwell spiritual and wellness practitioners. When you are not well, and the disease of whiteness is unwellness, you're going to perpetuate the systems of harm and spin within a self-delusional hamster wheel, dragging others along with you. And this is why indigenous knowledge is passed on through lineage. You don't become a master of a native tradition in 1, 2, or 3 weekends and then be given the stamp of authority through certifications by outsiders of the culture. The wellness space is toxic AF for people of color. It's toxic. So it's very hard being in this space when you're met with defensiveness and, we don't have the energy to debate or argue your privileged viewpoint. So believe us when we tell you there is something very wrong with the wellness space, with people who feel entitled to teach and appropriate indigenous cultural practices without putting in the decolonial work to access the true teachings and long-term transformational and healing work required. Everything I'm saying has been carefully researched, and I've spoken to other Black and brown bodies where my voice and experience is validated and where we share the same experiences. The false histories and behavioral conditionings of the colonizers that keep our own communities divided, that keep us estranged from our own communities, is something we must look into and unite through first uncolonizing ourselves, which is why I created the Dharma and Decolonial Toolkit, the source of authentic resources that center the indigenous view, not non-native ideological perspectives, but our own Sanatan civilization. Let's support each other in our decolonial unlearnings. We may not agree on everything, but we can agree to continue our uncolonization. The 9-to-5 matrix world seeks to diminish our spirit, especially as people of color, where we are subjected to constant microaggressions. Having to play small and dumb ourselves down to not ruffle the fragile feathers of whiteness not only causes self-betrayal, it diminishes our sense of self-worth. This feeling of lack, of scarcity, of fear, is a shadow projection of the white supremacists' true feelings hidden behind the ego that is bolstered and propped up by their false systems which keep marginalized communities from full self-expression. The fear is so great that they mock us further to ensure we can't rise up by taking our cultural medicine, bastardizing it, representing its wholeness in diluted parts, and convincing the world that it is their discovery and invention, that they are the true owners. So when we speak up, we are faced with so many barriers. The worst is white women tears. There are those who maintain these systems, and I've just told you who maintains it. It does not feel safe to speak our truths against the dominant group. So we speak to each other about it in our brown and black communities. We know the truth. There is safety in our own communities, but the problem is that the truth stays here, bubbling up in anger, but it is not expressed or released onto the world, because when it is, we just face pushback by our white friends even, who react with white fragility, a potent weapon to keep power and their privileged realities in their hands. I've recently had an experience where I found out about an injustice related to work, and bar a couple of white friends, the majority sought to invalidate my experience. Truly, I felt disgusted at their conditioning to undermine a brown body's experience in the systems of injustice that we live in. Not even white friends could show up. The only white friends that did are yoga sadhakas and those deep in their own ancestral healing journey. And I'm just so grateful for them. I just wish more white people had the courage to awaken and do the deep shadow work like these amazing few friends. I'm blessed to be connected to them. Those of us from Dharmic cultures just roll our eyes. Seriously, we roll our eyes in white wellness spaces. And there's a contraction in our bodies. There is hurt at cultural erasure and misinformation. If you hang around with people who look like you, get taught by people who look like you, how are you ever going to grow? How will you ever know anything besides your conditioning and viewpoint? I'm done having any conversations with white yoga teachers or facilitators who extract from indigenous practices for their business, except for a couple who do the anti-racism work and understand decoloniality. Because of the innate supremacy which has not been dealt with, the moment I talk about racism or decoloniality or even express my view, even with using non-violent communication, the immediate response is defensiveness. Absolute defensiveness. Walls go up. They can't even validate my experience. Not at all. I discovered pay inequality recently, and I was disappointed when all my white connections, except for the few I mentioned earlier, could not bring themselves to experience empathy. Instead, the questions of, what am I doing wrong to not get equal pay? Maybe it's me and my qualifications. Maybe I just didn't ask for it. Maybe others are more experienced than you. Honestly, I was disgusted. Now imagine a white person discovering that they're being paid less than their colleagues who are doing the same job, offering the same value. They wouldn't for a second lay blame on the one who's being victimized. They would place the responsibility on the organization. Their professional value wouldn't be questioned. So back to white body supremacy. The brown or black body simply is just not worth that much in this system of oppression. White studio owners will continue to favor and hire white employees, and there is an innate discrimination. It's a hard truth. And if you don't believe me, if you're that person who gets defensive, first of all, I don't want you within my realms. And secondly, Google BIPOC yoga and look up BIPOC yoga on TikTok or Instagram and have a look at all of those brown bodies who validate this experience I'm sharing with you. Move out of your comfort zone, out of the bubble of whiteness, and read a different room. It will be uncomfortable. But think about how us whose culture is commodified and appropriated, along with us being excluded from it, think, if not feel, into how much we endure and bear, the pain that we carry, which is the name of a book I recommend to have on your list. It's called The Pain We Carry. Details are in the Dharma and Decolonial Toolkit, which you can download for free. Within the Western yoga industry, another trendy form of the predator energy has morphed into the trauma-informed teacher. If one purports to be trauma-informed, I'd question if your trainings offer education on racial trauma, which all BIPOC bodies experience. And if you claim to be a trauma-informed yoga teacher, you best be clued up on the trauma on Indian bodies or those from the Indian subcontinent. You know, because yoga is Indian. Because this is the tone deafness of whiteness in the Western wellness spaces. You talk about trauma-informed yoga, but then you have a brown girl in your class or online space and you haven't got a clue in all of the ways you are effing triggering her by the way you handle her own cultural teachings, her histories, her languages, her ancestry, or should I say misinformed cultural teachings, mispronunciations of out-of-place mantras and out-of-context Sanskrit terms. And don't get me started on the handling of a brown and black body in a physical class. We do not share the same experiences, even as women. No, we don't. We have another layer, a toxic relationship or dynamic with the predator, which is embedded in the ideology of whiteness and other cultural imperialist ideologies that see themselves as culturally and in some cases religiously superior and higher up in their made-up hierarchies and power-hungry fantasies. Many Black and brown teachers of decolonizing the body advocate for marginalized communities to have their own spaces where they can be free to express without the threat of defensiveness, without the threat of being drained by arguing and debating, without the threat of our experiences not being met with compassion, empathy, and validation. We need to gather in our own communities. This is the foundation of grief work, after all. This is the start of being witnessed, of healing. And there's a book I recommend reading. It's by Kelsey Blackwell. It's called Decolonizing the Body. And she explains why Black and brown bodies need their own spaces to heal from the harm of the dominant culture. I'm going to read a few extracts from her book. Blackwell writes, "In these spaces, we can share stories about the discrimination we faced and find understanding and support. We can define ourselves on our own terms. When white people are present, this crucial examining usually doesn't happen. Sharing our experiences in integrated spaces often means preparing to defend our anger and frustration, or taking care of white individuals who find what is being said hurtful. This means that when POCs do take the leap to share painful experiences, white listeners often shift the focus back onto themselves and their own grievances. Thus, attention and power implicitly shift back to white individuals, reinforcing the status quo. There can also arise a need to translate our experiences into terms that white listeners will be more sympathetic to in order to be heard. Blackwell also says, "In my work in my community, I'm seeing a hunger to explore this pattern and to design new, more inclusive, more alive ways of being. Yet it's difficult to see the water in which we are swimming. Our hope lies in an empowered collection of voices that can help guide us towards being the community we long to be. This requires that white people step aside to support spaces in which POC members of the community are invited to feel, to be, and to touch our humanity on our terms in a way that feels not like colonization, but like coming home." And later she writes, "For anyone who has tried to, quote, invite in more diversity, you may wonder, why is it so difficult to get Black and brown people to show up? The reason is that merely inviting more people of color into a space does not in and of itself make that space inclusive. Patterns of white dominance suffuse the space just like other spaces we occupy, only this time we're calling it inclusive. That's more painful and frustrating than being in spaces that are blind," she says. Staying in that, quote, inclusive room actually involves POC putting aside our own needs and taking care of white people as we've been conditioned to do. Then we go home and tell our brown friends how uncomfortable it was and all the things that were said or done that we can't believe. We do not go back. Many, quote, inclusive communities, spiritual communities, remain predominantly white. And this is read from the book Decolonizing the Body. Kelsey Blackwell's words here are music to my ears. Let's place this knowing in the context of doing business and with owners of wellness spaces in mind. Who you hire for your business matters. If you come from an ethnically diverse locality and you hire only people who look like you, well, then there is an obvious issue with power, a fear of the other, the need to keep power and privilege and resources within whiteness. While Native people are trying to survive within white supremacist systems, white wellness facilitators just think about, how do I get more money, more power, more of that for me? Whereas the Dharmic business model has to do with the abundance and reciprocity. It asks, with what I have created, how do I give back? And especially give back to the community in whose resources you are using for your business. One way could be hiring and paying native teachers who live to nourish and protect the wisdom of their ancestors. How about that for giving back? This is a Hindu concept called Samanya Dharma, doing right by the community, acting in ethical ways that add to the common good of all, acting in ways that transcends individualism, and remembering that we are all connected. Samanya Dharma, these universal moral and ethical human duties that we as Hindus are bound to, is the secret to why Bharat, in all of its diversity, flourished pre-invasions. So back to the knowing that we, as bodies of culture, need our own safe spaces. And I already know that I don't agree with a lot of popular, quote, South Asian teachers in the wellness spaces because of their readiness to follow colonial conspiracies of their own ancestral traditions. The blanket term South Asian was given by white people to group brown bodies together without understanding our diversity. So I don't like the word South Asian. It also serves to dilute identity and group us as a homogeneous other. But these, quote, South Asian spaces are still safe places to land for Dharmic people, safer to land than within circles of whiteness. It's sad, but true to our experience. In white circles, I have to silence my truth and expression. I have to silence what I know to be true because I am not the majority voice and therefore my experience is not validated. It is questioned, and that question itself hurts. To question if my reality is true. I also find that these spaces are very performative, in parroting Indian systems and words. And most of the time, they don't even know that they're speaking and acting out of the context of the true teachings. They don't even know it because it's simply not their culture. They've not been brought up in it or had any connections to the living cultures. They continue to surround themselves with those who look like themselves and continue to exist in bubbles of ignorance, continue to hire and pay great rates to each other, but a brown and black body is worth less, paid less. In the capitalist industry, white bodies are programmed to pay brown and black bodies less. I'm saying it again, it is trained within the system of white supremacy to believe falsely that our bodies hold less value. We exist as labor for white business owners, not as equals. Where does this reflect in your business, if you have one or are currently building one? Where is this reflected in the current organization you're part of? I encourage you to look up Meeta Malik, who's just released a book called Reimagine Inclusion. She talks a lot on racial inequality in the workplace and has so many resources to educate yourselves with. She also has a podcast called Brown Table Talk, and it's so validating, especially if you're out there working in the matrix world and haven't yet established your business. So as brown and black bodies, we need our own spaces to heal. But that doesn't mean we can't help those from the dominant culture. On the contrary, because of our deep empathy and knowing and rootedness, supporting those from the dominant culture works. The majority of my clients are from white cultures, and that speaks to the willingness to recognize authenticity, to place value in the teachings and knowledge, rather than what is most influential, popular, the sameness, the optics. You're here still listening because you're ready and wanting to build a business that doesn't exploit others, a business that is more ethical and conscious than those rooted in colonialism. The matrix. And so the question you're eager to get answered, and the ones that I've received, were to do with mindfulness. Is it better to remove yourself from representing indigenous teachings like yoga and use other words like mindfulness, somatics, and embodiment practices instead for your business and offerings? And I will answer in the next episode because we're out of time. So in part 2 of Business and Decoloniality, I move into the remaining topics, which are McMindfulness, algorithm bias, and brown and black entrepreneurs pay attention to this one. Then I go into digital colonialism, and finally Dharmic Entrepreneurship, which is the best part and where I'll feel a lot lighter discussing this exciting way of doing business that honors the ancestors. So don't forget to download my Dharma and Decolonial Toolkit, a list of resources to help you uncolonize body, mind, heart, and spirit. Rise up, warrior.